Hello everyone, welcome to this Men's Health podcast. My name is Hugo Ribatika and I'll be your host. Over the next few minutes, we're going to tackle a number of issues around men's health. We'll take a look at stigma, we'll talk about cultural expectations, road rage, the various things that impact your health and my health. And I'd like to introduce one of our two participants in this conversation, Psychologist Dr. Dr. Better, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Hey, I look forward to the engagement as well.
So, before we get started, as a psychologist, when we start to talk about men's health, what for you comes to mind? What are some of those key issues?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think for me, what comes to mind firstly is depression, anxiety, inability to express myself, me being the provider, even things are bad, I can't actually share that. And also the anger that comes as a primary or secondary emotion. I can't express pain, so therefore it's easier for me as a man to express that. I can slam the door.
So Dr. Better, as a psychologist, has been in the business for many years and will be unpacking for us many issues as we carry on with this conversation. Damien Seid is the Chief Executive Officer of Company Wellness Solutions, and obviously as the CEO of Company Wellness Solutions, Damien, you're all too familiar with some of the challenges that men in particular have around mental health.
Very much so, Hugo. You know, it's a predominantly the people who reach out to us, unfortunately, are female. So I'd say majority of people who utilize our services, and just to clue everyone in, our services are mostly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week counseling for the employed individual. And I think 60 to 70% of people who reach out are female. Unfortunately, there's still a big stigma attached to reaching out for mental health support amongst the male community, especially in South Africa. And even though what I've noticed is that we have a very, very high trend of anger, aggression, domestic violence, etc., and unfortunately the men are not making use of the services as much as we'd like them to. So hopefully after this podcast, if you're a man and you're listening to this podcast and you feel like you need to reach out to someone, ideally they take the initiative to do so.
Dr. Better, you know, one of the things that Damien's spoken about is about reaching out to someone, right? And I was watching something the other day, and this man who was speaking in this podcast said, well, you can't open up to your woman because you're supposed to be her protector. And the minute that you open up to a woman, you open up that relationship to multiple challenges. And his argument is that men have got to have a tribe of men, you know, your boys that you can speak to, you can pick up the phone, you know, you go out, you're on the golf course, or you after the gym, or whatever it is. So let's talk about how important it is to have that tribe, to have those individuals that you can speak to. So whether it's the relationship that you have with your partner that allows you to speak to your woman, or you've got a group of men and you can go to your men cave and you can have these conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a very important one. We call it, you know, a structure, a support structure is very important for men. But what I've picked up in the years as well, upon research as well, that men, sometimes we talk a lot of fluff and things are quite platonic as well. There's an inability for us to actually delve in, you know, to the core issues in terms of how I'm feeling and what's actually causing that. Because there's this fear of being judged. There's this fear of, for instance, you can't maintain your home, so therefore you're not man enough. So all of those general stigmas around masculinity are things that are actually drawing us further away from actually opening up. So you'd find that we don't know actually the men that we chill with or sit around, but actually we can have beers all the time. So it becomes problematic to a point where then the rage comes in, the anger then comes in, hence the suicide rates for men are quite high as well. And I mean, as Damien was touching on, more often than not, I see a lot of women as well, and how men come into the therapy in my practice is by virtue of them actually have engaged in infertility issues as well. So you'd find that the men will be like, actually doc, this is quite fun, I'm going to stay beyond and actually now have individual therapy. But it's quite rare for men to come up and be like, okay, but once they're in therapy as well, they then actually have the support structure. So it's very important for them to actually have that, because men caves, technically, I've got a men cave. It's more efficient for me if I'm alone in the man cave than actually having other men. So if I actually have other parties, I then have to cater to that. So it becomes quite problematic. So men then becomes this creature that he can only be truly honest with himself when he looks upon a mirror, as Socrates actually put it. But the support structure is very important, and you'd find that in early stages of any intimate relationships, men tend to be more open and more expressive in and with their partners.
Earlier, so men are more, you're saying men are more open in the beginning of the relationship, but as the familiarity comes in, and so you maybe think that you'll be judged for having emotions. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of men and maybe married men or men in relationships feel, that they can't talk to their spouse and open up to their spouse, perhaps because they're concerned that by talking about their feelings, it could come across as not just weakness, but perhaps they're worried that their spouse may become defensive when they talk about their feelings,
or actually be used against them in future arguments or topics, things like that, so it becomes quite difficult for them. But support structure, Hugo, I think for me is a very important one, having other men to bounce ideas off, because you can't just be an island alone and actually instruct or have particular norms in the family system if you don't actually have certain environments where you then bounce that off as well. So it's important, because a lot of the times men, in terms of our own worldview and childhood development or upbringing, you'd find that we come from if not single parent headed families as well, where the mum is always there, and men will actually venture into the mines or anything. So it becomes quite difficult to actually do something where you don't have a reference of. So it's the support structure for me is very, very important to have.
Damien, I want you to come in there where the support structure is concerned. And obviously you've had multiple engagements with men across various platforms, because that's what Company Wellness Solutions does, right? It looks at some of these issues around mental health. Now, the issue for me from what Dr. Bed is saying is that it's not the absence of a structure, because those structures are there. You have your three mates that you meet up with on a Friday night. You go fishing occasionally or whatever it is. But it's about using that structure or knowing the capacity of the structure, right? Because you and I will sit down with Dr. Beda and we're three mates, and we'll say, okay, you know what, guys, there's an opportunity to make some money, right? Or there's a business opportunity, or whatever it is, and we will chase it, right? And
because it's exciting and it's fun.
And we will close a deal upon a deal. But at what point do we then convert this structure that's existing and make use of it to say, hey, you know what, guys, I'm really struggling. These are the challenges that I'm facing.
And I think that's also why it's so important to pick your friends so wisely, because, and I was recently thinking about this and thinking about my support structure and my friend structure. And, I've got one best friend who lives 1,000,000 miles away, who, I find it very difficult to ever really communicate with them from another country. And then maybe 2 or 3 close friends here in South Africa, and I was going through a bit of a tough time recently, and I said to my wife, I feel so alone. And she said to me, but you're not alone, you have your friends to talk to. And I said, no, you don't understand, because when she has a tough time, and this is great for her, and I'm so happy that she has this, is when she's going through a tough time, she picks up the phone, she makes a phone call, she can have 3 girls there ready to lend her their ears, ready to listen, ready to offer advice, maybe not the best advice all the time, but ready to listen. And I think as men, we believe that no one wants to listen to our problems. And we believe our problems are our problems. And as a man, we're supposed to have the capacity to take care of it by ourselves. And we actually block ourselves off, because I think what we'll find is that often our friend wants to be there. I know for myself, if my friend, my best friend, came to me with an issue, I would want to listen, I would want to support, and of course, as a man, I'd want to offer my advice and potentially a solution to the problem. But I'm very seldomly approached by my friends when they're going through a problem. What I've noticed, though, is if I do go to a friend with a problem and I open up to a very good friend of mine, oftentimes what happens is he ends up opening up to me as well. And so now we're having a conversation where we're talking about our problems, but it took one of us approaching the other and saying, hey, let's sit down and have a discussion about what's bothering us, rather than, you expect a phone call from your friend. It's, how are you? Let's go for drinks. Let's go have a good time. Let's chat about our kids. We can moan about our wives a little bit as a joke, and that sort of thing.
Or
but
not.
Or not. No, we'd never. If my wife's listening, I never do that. I think that once you have to take that first step and be brave enough, and that's the thing. That's why counseling is also so important, because you do need that if you don't have the ability to go to a friend, a male friend, talk about issues that maybe you feel only another man would understand, perhaps about your aggression or road rage or whatever it is you're currently going through, or you had a big altercation, or you're going through a divorce, or there's a death. We feel like we don't want to burden our friends with these problems, and oftentimes we forget that these people are our friends for a reason, and they should be there for us.
So I'm not entirely sure, Dr. Beta, and you're the professional psychologist, if it's about not wanting to burden our friends, because oftentimes you'll run into a situation, you need financial assistance, you've got a flat tire, your kids have a problem at home, or your missus has a problem at home, and you're away, right? And you will call up your mate and you will ask for assistance, right? That's a burden of sorts. But the issue is that this is mental, right? Yeah. So, and I don't think it's a conscious decision, and a stand to be guided, where a man thinks to himself, well, if I start talking to Damien about this challenge that I've got emotionally, then it's going to be a problem for Damien. It's almost inbuilt. Now, if it is inbuilt in us from whatever age, how do we unlearn it in order to protect our mental health?
Yeah, that's a very good one. But also, just want to quickly touch on Damien. I mean, what you mentioned is very important, because guys, we need to remember, as much as we have go-to friends, and the solutions or the advice that they give us are very solution-based, and there's a lot of high, what we call toxic positivity. Everything is going to be okay, but you've got this, you've got that. So therefore, it's quick to actually be dismissive around the actual problem, because I'm coming here within a very mental, emotional problem. But our friends, not to say they are bad or negative, but at that particular time, everything they want to do at that time, as I mentioned, it's very surface. It's quite toxic positivity, to a point where we want to actually highlight anything that's positive, but not delve into the problem that you're actually presenting to us. So the other issue is that the toxicity is rooted in the understanding that men cannot seek out help. So health-seeking behaviors here also come into play, in a sense that it's very subconscious. I'm not going to come to you and actually tell you, because there's a fear of vulnerability. If that fear of vulnerability is expressed or exposed, it means my own identity is actually dismantled. So the identity of men is rooted in the ability to be strong, to have endurance, and also to have the necessary skills to achieve any adversity that one is actually faced with. So if I'm then here naked before you, it means I can never have that actually be disrooted in your image. You'd always see me as that person who asked for sugar, who asked for problems when I have a flat tire. So it's a very subconscious type of thing that we actually hold as men.
So how do I fix that? How do I go to my own mates? In fact, how do I identify stress? How does it manifest? Because I want to be in a situation where I can go to Damien and say, hey, bud, you don't look okay, dude. What's a problem? What's going on? So offering Damien a safe space, because I've picked it up, because we don't really have capacity, right, to open up on our own, generally speaking, right? So how do I then pull it out of him? How do I identify that you, Dr. Beta, are not the same, right? And then offer you a safe space to say, you know what, dude, looks like you're going through something. If you are, I'm right here. And the minute that I couch this safe space for you, does it not allow you to then open up? It also then allows me to then come to you and say, you know what, bud, sheesh, dude, this is what I'm going through. How do I handle it?
I think what's important is the unlearning part. So men needs to be at a place where they can actually understand that a journey of selection. So I've got Damien, I've got Hugo, I've got Zama. So who between the three can actually then be able to have the capacity to listen to such things? Because remember, and again, not to speak ill of anybody, but you know your buddies, you know a particular friend whom has the mental capacity or the EQ to actually understand what I'm going through and actually be able to be present. So I think for me, the unlearning part actually starts with the man to actually then try and formulate a selection process of seeing that friend, I think they has an emotional capacity to understand and be there for me, firstly, and that's it. And then groom men into that particular element to then say, listen, you're my go-to person, I'm your go-to person as well. So by not overwhelming that person, so we can then also start to actually have that ripple effect to the next person, to the next person, to the next friend as well. But I think the most important part for me to even go to you or anything, we then need to actually be able to speak about dreams to each other.
Damien, I had a chat the other day, and I went out to Soweto, and I was speaking to ex-convicts, if you will, part of a rehabilitation process. and I took a prop with me, and that prop was a bottle of soda, right? And I said to them, and I shook it. Right? I didn't open it, but I shook it, and I said, if I open this, right, there's going to be a little explosion. But that little explosion for me almost represents what's going on in the average man's life, right? There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff that's bottled up, right? Now, how important is it, in your view, to let stuff out, even if you don't have a solution to it? How important is it to just say, you know what, Damien, this is my problem, right? And for you to hear me out. And even if you're not coming back to me to say, you know what, you got this, but just for me to be able to, I've spoken to someone, that's a relief.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem that we as men are facing with that specific situation is that we don't recognize our own emotions. So I think that we don't understand that anger, and correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, but anger is a masking emotion. And yes, anger has its place, but anger is a masking emotion. It is often masking.
Not expressing?
No, I'd say it's almost a masking. It's an emotion that isn't a true emotion in and of itself. So I'm feeling, for example, despondent, or let's say road rage. Someone cuts you off, you get angry. Why are you getting angry that someone's cut you off? You're getting angry at someone else's behavior that has nothing to do with you. So you're actually feeling disrespected. And instead of going, okay, I feel disrespected, let me pause, let me be mindful for that 1 second and actually notice the emotion. Instead, we go straight to anger because that's been our go-to. And so we sort of aren't in tune with ourselves. And if we aren't in tune with ourselves, and if we just label ourselves and be labeled as an angry person, this guy's always angry, this guy's got a short fuse, this guy's blows up for no reason. It's never for no reason. And I think that it's especially tough for men that have gone through their whole lives where they've never learned how to identify emotions. I'll give you an example, and this is something that I'm trying to teach my son. And in fact, it happened even last night, and he turned around to me and he said, "You hurt my feelings." And the first thing that came to mind was I didn't hurt his feelings, I did nothing wrong. And that was a defensive mechanism for me from a little boy who was opening up.
Yeah.
And in that moment, my wife heard him say that, and she whispered to me, "Remember feelings," because I've been on this whole journey over the last few years about feelings. And I could have gone, "I didn't hurt your feelings, I don't know what you're talking about." That would be training that little boy to mask his feelings, which we've all grown up with. And instead I said, "Okay, explain to me how I hurt your feelings and what I did." And he explained it to me, and it was actually just a misunderstanding. And he thought I did something to upset him, and where in fact I did something to help my wife who just got out of surgery. So I explained it to him, and he went, "Oh, I understand. Thank you." And his whole mood changed, and it was
dissipated
about
that emotion.
Oh, dissipated it completely, and he didn't get angry. He was sad because I'd hurt his feelings, because he saw me as saying something. He took it the wrong way. I mean, obviously, he's a little 6-year-old boy. He doesn't understand everything that's going on.
You raise an issue. Sorry, Damien. You talk about he took it the wrong way. Now, we all have ability to, we all interpret based on experiences, right? And I think situations are about individuals, right? So I don't know if it's entirely fair. Dr. Better, you can come in there to say somebody took it the wrong way or misinterpreted what I meant, because they have capacity based on experience to interpret. I often say to my own wife that, you know what, we're on the same team, right? If I hurt your feelings, it's inadvertent, it's by mistake, it's not intentional. I'm never going to stop whatever it is I'm doing to deliberately hurt you, right? So my own expectation is that your interpretation, right, of any situation should be the question. Babe, what happened? Because I'm not out to get you. But it also raises the issue of emotions and feelings. I learned many years ago that feelings are almost like opinions. They're neither right nor wrong, they just are. So this is how I feel. So if somebody slaps me on the wrist and I say, ow, you can't tell me it's not sore, because you're not the recipient, Damien, of that intervention or of that expression. I'm receiving it, so I'm telling you how I feel. So just how important is all of that? And to throw in something else, Damien talked about mindfulness. Stop. I mean, we've got all these apps that speak to mindfulness. So on the back end of this barrage of questions, talk to us about mindfulness and how important it is.
I think maybe it's very important to understand that, you know, certain things happen by virtue of individualism. I always stress that, especially in couples therapy, and that I'm against the Bible or anything, but individuality for me is key. Damien needs to actually still have his own things. The wife still also needs to have her own things. This is where we come to what we call the line of compromise, because I mean, we are raised up differently. We both hold different worldviews, so it's important for us to understand that. So, you know, when his son is coming up to him and says, "Dad, you hurt my feelings," that's important. I always tell them feelings are factual for the individuals expressing them. So the best thing to do is just to acknowledge that. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, son, and I appreciate you also, because I mean, that's what you're teaching them young, emotional regulation. And a lot of the times kids in my practice actually struggle from that. They really struggle with that to a point where they can't express them. Hence, we now raise kids who are bullies now, because they can't emotionally regulate. So that's very important. And I think those are the new transformed men that we are trying to actually embark and actually bring into this world. Men who are in touch with their own feelings and emotions. So mindfulness, I'll always teach and tell patients, listen, just count to 10 before you respond as well. So it's important at the backdrop, at hindsight as well. I was doing another interview the other day actually for the reality show I was telling you about, and then I wanted to wear my late uncle's leather jacket. My sister came in, she's like, "No, you're gonna train, this is ugly, don't do that." But upon that time I was like, no, I want it looks good, because I was thinking of a beautiful caption. Yeah. But now after, you know, being mindful, I'm like, actually I could wear it any other day, but not for this, because at that time people won't understand. They see something, you know, in terms of how they perceive that. So perception is also key in terms of how you understand other people's feelings and emotions. So our thoughts influence our feelings, and how our feelings then will then intervene in terms of how we behave. So it's very important to understand that triad, that thoughts, emotions and behaviors, they're very much interlinked. So mindfulness then comes into that reflection. It's very important for us to reflect every now and then. What I do every Sunday, 30-minute walk, I reflect on the week's goals that were not achieved and see how I can best actually approach them into the new week as well, because I can't be doing the same thing every week and expect any other result other than me failing. And failure for me has been my closest friend. So we need to also encourage, especially the young ones, to also fail, and also not to set standards for them that are quite high to a point where he's going to now be afraid to come to dad and say, "Dad, I didn't do well in this. Let's unpack, son. What is it that you didn't do right?" So I feel like as much as we may be the generation of men who can't express, but I feel like we've actually now been in touch in terms of our teachings to the next generation, which is our son. So I think you're also doing an amazing job with your son as well.
Yeah, Damien. Well, you raise again another star point there, and that's if we don't have, if we lack as men in an ability to deal with our own emotions, how do we appreciate this fact, and how do we then create young men or young boys, or raise young boys to do the exact opposite?
Well, we're going to fail in that. So that's why it starts with us. And this was the exact thing that happened to me with my son. So what exactly happened was, my wife walked into the bedroom and tried to pick something up post-surgery, and I said, no, don't pick it up. And my son thought I was saying, don't pick up his stuff from the floor, being mean, or do you know, and it was a genuine misunderstanding, and I could have just brushed it off and said just go to bed, because it was pretty much at bedtime, and you know, kids are extra emotional when they're a little bit tired. But instead it literally took 5 seconds for me to say, okay, what is it that I did or said that hurt your feelings? Tell me about the feeling that you're having. And I learn every day from this little boy, because he's so much wiser than me as far as emotions go, and we've obviously done something right somewhere along the line. But I do learn every day from this little boy who's so capable of turning around and going, no, you hurt my feelings, or no, I'm feeling this, or I'm feeling that, and he's very expressive, and I'm so proud of him for being expressive. And I look at him as if I would like to be able to be that expressive. Of course, young, that it's harder for them to regulate their emotions, but as a man, imagine if I could stop and go, oh, I'm feeling disrespected, or I'm feeling let down or lonely, or I'm feeling like a failure, or like I have failed, or any of these things which are emotions, and instead of going, let me bottle it up, like you said, with the soda bottle, you know, and eventually you're basically shaking yourself up by putting these emotions down and down and down. And then when we erupt because someone cuts us off in traffic, or because someone disrespected us, and we're like, this is the straw that broke the camel's proverbial back, and we explode at the unfortunate person who's there. And then we ruin their day, you ruin your own day, you ruin everyone else's day. Hugo, we were discussing before the podcast, just like you said, you ruin everybody else's day, and that's really what explosive anger does. And you know, you mentioned, you know, men, look, more men commit suicide, more men are in prison, less men have get through to get their degrees, more men fail at school, you know, so you know, we are generally having a hard time, and I think this is all boiled down to the inability to recognize emotions and to make poor split-second decisions. And I also believe a lot of the time a lack of a good male role model is a major cause of this from childhood, which then that trauma then grows with us as we grow into adults. And unless we can stop at some point and get help, and yes, it's all very nice having a support system, but sometimes as men we need to stop and go, okay, I'm spiraling. I'm either drinking too much, I'm fighting and shouting every day. I mean, one of our assessment questions is, how often do you lose your temper? And there's a reason we want to know how often do you lose your temper, because if you're losing your temper every day or even every week, there's a problem. You have a problem. And we don't stop and go, okay, I'm losing my temper all the time. Why? We go, I'm just an angry person. And we started, and then we accept that everyone says this guy's an angry guy. You better watch out. He's always in a bad mood.
So on the other side of losing your temper is a guy that sulks, right? So doesn't get angry, but if something happens, then you know what, he kind of goes into a bit of a shell, processes it. Situation might take minutes, hours, might take days before he comes up and he's okay again. I don't want us to judge Dr. Bella, which is the lesser of the two evils, if you will. But just draw a comparison or parallels between the guy who's expressive via anger and the guy who's expressive courtesy of sulk or retreating.
So that's an important one for me. Yeah. That's a very key distinction in terms of having the ability to be expressive on, as and when it happens, and having the ability also not to actually, take sight or seek to reflect and be mindful of that. So it's actually important for us to distinguish between the two. But the latter then comes with experience and time as well. So it's important for you to understand that when something happens, I'm not a reflection of that. It's actually something that is actually a reflection of the next person. But what's important is how I react. As much as I may be a perpetrator to anything, but how you react, we are both then in the same spectrum of us being perpetrators. So there's no victim here anymore. So it's important how you respond and how you react. For instance, the man who's then able to then, okay, this happened, let me sulk, let me be recluse for a few seconds, let me think about it, and then let me come back. But with that one, I'm a bit worried about that one and stuff. How long does it then take to actually reflect and think, okay, maybe let me act in this way? So more often than not, society then looks at that man as the lesser and the weaker one, because one who's able to reason. So sometimes reason is not needed according to certain environments as well. So the one that was actually very expressive and bossed with anger, I prefer that one because that one is a more healthier one. As I always mention, that anxiety for me is a healthy type of not disorder, but there's a particular anxiety that is healthy and important that drives you to certain things. So the minute you have anxiety, it means you're about to do something that you take seriously and something that is going to be quite challenging. So a man who then actually expresses himself in that way is a man who's able to be teachable, is a man who's actually able to be conditioned by rather not do this way, maybe that's that way.
But sulking is expression.
But it's very recluse though. We can't see that. It's not expressive. Sulking is very individualistic to a point where I'm sulking, in the absence of the actual event in that incident at that time. So it's important when you then sulk, which is okay, but also it's very situational as well. So it's important to understand when do I sulk and how do I express it as well. Because sulking for men is vulnerability, and vulnerability is something that we don't easily go to. It depends after we've assessed the environment, so therefore I can then be vulnerable. So the man who then sulks is a man who then actually can be seen otherwise outside in society, but he then takes time to deal or handle things. Like for instance in the room, when my partner says, at the house, when my partner says we need to talk about this and this and this, and then I'm like, okay, can we talk? And then I listen, and then I'm like, I'll respond at a time that at a due course. That man hardly ever responds. So I've noticed in the past that I don't ever respond. That's me deflecting, but I'm also bottling it up. Whereas the person is now here.
Are you a sulker?
Sometimes when I'm with my mummy, but
Mummy's boy.
oh shucks, cat's out the bag.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Can I add to that? With the sulking, I think it's very much dependent on how you sulk, and I believe sulking is a cry for attention, just as aggression is or anger is. If you're sulking around the house and your family can clearly see something's wrong, they're going to come to you and go, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And you're going to go, nothing, I'm fine. Nothing, I'm fine. And that's almost a form of gaslighting, because you're lying to your family who's coming and asking you what's wrong. And instead of you going, well, this is how I'm feeling, you're lying and you're saying nothing's wrong. But your actions say something different. You're sulking around the house. You want your family and those who love you to think that this is the way that you should be dealing with problems. It's not the right way. The right way is to obviously communicate and find your support system and do all of these good things that we're not all fortunate enough to be able to do. But sulking, when do we really ever sulk around when we're on our own? We don't. When we're on our own, and if we're going through a problem, we'll probably put on the TV, we'll browse on our phones, we might think of someone to call, maybe some people turn to substances, which is obviously another coping mechanism which you should not be doing, but sulking around the house and showing people that something's wrong, and then they ask you what's wrong and you go nothing. For me, that I agree with you is almost worse than anger, because when you're angry as a man, you're almost saying, I need help. It's a cry for help. You're showing. And when someone often comes to a man who's angry and goes, hey, I can see that something is wrong. I've got broad shoulders. Man, sit down. Let's talk. Let's discuss it. Or even your psychologist, I can see you're angry. Talk about it. You'll notice that man will go, well, where do I start? It's this. And then that man gets that off his chest. He's feeling better. But a man who's sulking and who's denying any problem but is keeping that right inside of his brain and bottling that up, that to me is almost the weaker way of dealing with it, because you're looking for the attention from others but denying it when you get it. And so I would say that a lot of self-reflection needs to be done for a person who likes to sulk rather than who likes to express their emotions.
So how do we train, I don't know if training is the right word, but how do we teach ourselves to manage emotions, right? Now I'll give you a clear example. At some point in my life, post my divorce, I said to myself, well, if something annoys me or if something pisses me off, right, I'm going to talk about it there and then. I'm going to deal with it, and I'm going to forget about it. It's going to be done. Mm-hmm. And it worked, right? But it was a mental choice that I took about how I was going to process certain emotions, that I was going to take them head on, right? So we've talked about anger, we've talked about sulking and potentially everything else in between. So let's talk about the process of, sheesh, I'm continually angry, I don't want to be angry, but if I express myself, I get it off my chest. How do I broaden my shoulders, so to speak, and deal with anger without necessarily going to the 9.0 on the anger scale, right? But minimizing the expression of the anger, because it isn't necessarily positive for my partner or for my kids, right? So it's okay to be angry, as we all agree, because it's an expression, right? But how do I have to go to 10 to express my anger, or can I still express my anger on 3.0 on the scale?
I think the answer is actually in your question. It's conditioning, definitely conditioning. So how we treat hangers is the same way we treat addiction. You know, it's not just a cut-off, stop smoking, stop taking a particular substance. It's what we call a gradual type of intervention. That's very important. So how you condition yourself needs to be gradual. And because if it's not gradual, you're going to always be hard on yourself. You're always going to be a relapse. So for me, relapses in such instances are very healthy. I always encourage patients or clients to tell me exactly when you do think about smoking, when you do think about doing the exact thing that we are actually trying to avoid as well. That for me is important. It means that the intervention or the treatment process is actually working. So it's always around the idea of actually conditioning thyself. But this is quite difficult to happen if you're amongst older people and almost noise as well. So important to take time, just be by yourself. I always say solitude is key. I mean, Aristotle once said, you know, if you've mastered the art of actually being solitude and understanding the power of that, you're either a god. In actually, if you are able to do that. But it's very important to understand the dynamics and the power of just me being, you know, taking time back and being mindful and saying that, okay, maybe that wasn't the best way I could have actually approached it as well. So more often than times, I thought in my also earlier life, personal life, I'd always be engaged in arguments with my partner. And then I sit back and I'm like, why am I always right? Why do I always think I'm right? So it's also perspective that actually assists you in the conditioning as well. And then I started actually approaching it in a manner that says, let me just listen to this person and take whatever that's been told and let me adapt new behaviors into that. So the art of actually conditioning yourself goes well in terms of actually understanding and taking a perspective as well. So for me, I found it was very important to apply and adapt a different type of perspective and approach to how I handle problems, specifically with my loved ones as well. So you find that also becoming a breadwinner at home, it's quite difficult for you to be told certain issues or problems, or to also be told that, listen, what you are doing is actually wrong. So I've then learned to actually take back and be quite mindful of the fact that there are certain things that people are not going to tell me by virtue of actually either being a breadwinner or a particular position or role I hold in the family. So it's important to actually be down and very hello. There's a verse I think in Psalms that says, to the poor be poor, to the rich be rich. So I'm able to adapt myself in such contexts where I'm then able to understand you in that level. So for me, that is quite key. Conditioning yourself and having that perspective is quite a journey, but a very important one, because now I'm actually be able to understand and relate to a security guard who's giving me directions, to a guy, to a CEO, to another person, where I then understand where they are at that time. That's
Right.
it.
Cool. As we draw to a close, gentlemen, Damien, I'd like you to respond to this, and I think that's something that applies to me, that I can relate to, about why am I always right?
That's exactly, yeah.
You know, I mean, that for me is just
Exactly.
such a nugget.
Yeah, because we have a winning mindset as men. We have to win. We have to win against our partner. We have to win against the guy who cut us off. We didn't win. We've now lost 10 meters space. We have to win in every aspect of our life. There's a lot put on us as men to win, to be the breadwinners, to be the best, to achieve. It is a very difficult thing to have consistently on you, and I think firstly to have less conflict within a relationship or in a marriage, the first thing to realize is that there are no winners in an argument when you're arguing with your spouse. There's a compromise that can be reached. There's understanding, and there's of course boundaries that you place, and boundaries are not something that you put in place to stop another person from doing something. Boundaries are something you put in place to protect yourself. But I think you cannot win against people all the time. It's not about winning. And I think we need to remember, when we get into or engage in arguments, it's not about winning, because that is often when anger comes up, is when we feel like we're about to lose, and the fear of losing, the fear of failure, can generate a lot of anger in a lot of men. And the last thing I also wanted to add into that was that if you go to therapy, and if you start at the beginning, and I'm talking about not talk therapy, but let's say like an imago therapy or something like that, the first thing they do is they give you a list of emotions. And I remember when I first read that list of emotions, I said, wow, there are so many emotions. There's not just happy, sad, angry. There's disappointment. There's so many different emotions that we don't realize. Now, if you ask a woman how many emotions there are, they'll tell you there's so many emotions, and they can probably rattle them all off. They understand.
6,000 of them.
Yeah. And you ask a man how many emotions are, he'll go, oh, I'm sure there's lots. And so, can you name them? And they'll go, anger, is hunger an emotion? So no, hunger is not an emotion. So yeah, I think that those are the really two aspects, is to realize that there are so many emotions. I advise every single man out there to go online and print out a list of all the emotions, and to actually shock yourself. And once you've read through those emotions, it's always good practice to go, what am I feeling now? And I know it's work, and you said, Doc, that it's better to take time, and it is going to take time to do these things, but it's good practice to learn the different emotions, and then as well to realize it's not all about winning all the time.
Dr. Bitter, on that note, I'm going to give you the last word, and that really is to teach us how to learn to lose for the greater good.
Yeah. Very important. So very, very, very important. I think for us, in order to learn how to lose, we need to know. I love philosophy. It was my second major. John Locke said, we are born tabula rasa, meaning we are born blank slates. So losing isn't understanding that you don't know anything and you're not in control of anything. So it's important to let go of all of that. But also, just imparting maybe for the next conversation, is that the emasculation of men does not only come from society but from self, in the inability or the absence of money. So we root our identity in the ability and what we can provide. So sometimes our definition shouldn't be rooted in the abilities of how we can provide. So in the ability of what we can actually do for ourselves as well, which can make us better for the next person and the next. That's all.
Top psychologist, Dr. Bitter, thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, man.
And a big thank you to you, Damien Seid, CEO of our company Wellness Solutions.
Thanks, Hugo.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it, everybody. My name is Hugo Ribatika. It's been an absolute blast having you along on this Men's Health podcast. Look forward to the pleasure of your company not too far from now. Goodbye.